Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. From the politics of exploitation to the economics of survival, history had shown that national development remains tied to the innovation of industry, the dedication of labor, and the evolution of unionism in Africa and around the world. Between the man on the street hoping to get a lifeline and the professional at the office working to meet a deadline, present-day discontent is often driven by the side effects of pay disparity and social inequality. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the lingering labor concerns in Africa in the wake of this year's International Workers' Day celebration? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Workers from different affiliates under the United Labour Congress held a rally. They marched from Ojuelegba and converged at the National Stadium, where they raised several labour issues. Some of the labour leaders held divergent views about the several challenges faced by an average worker.
We are still not at the same position. We have moved, but one would have wished that we would have gone further than this. But because there are other factors that affect our operations, we operate within an environment, within a political space, that even when you desire 10,000 naira for your people, the environment affects it. Even when you even get that 10,000 you demanded, the outside environment affects it.
Today is a hope, a restoration day, and so we believe that in the nearest future, the issues of the minimum wage will be concluded.
Workers' welfare is at the lowest ebb. Salaries are not being paid. Casualization is the order of the day. Anti-labor vices are taking the place of decent work. And I think our government should rise up to that challenge.
The situation in Nigeria that has to deal with the workers' issues are not being addressed. And looking at the situations, there is no cause, there is no reason for workers to celebrate today's date. But however, we are doing it because Nigerians workers are very strong and very steadfast in their commitment to their jobs.
Midday celebration is a time when workers should really sit down and celebrate. Celebrate achievements. It's a time for stock taking. Celebrate your achievements and then make more demands on your employers and the government. But we have today that workers really, a lot of workers are really in crisis. One, the minimum wage cannot take anybody home anymore, cannot buy a bag of rice. And as such, we need the higher minimum wage.
Nigerian workers celebrate the 37th International Workers' Day here in Nigeria.
On a day associated with the start of spring, May the 1st is marked every year as International Workers' Day to promote labor associations and highlight the unfavorable working conditions millions around the world find themselves. From Cape to Cairo, this year's commemoration featured members of trade unions and the usual expression, displeasure at government, highlighting how sustainable demands and inadequate supply are yet to meet halfway. Now let's bring in our guest. Comrade Gbenga Komolafe is an activist, trade unionist and social commentator. And Amechi Asugwani, a National Vice President, Nigeria Labour Congress. Good to have you gentlemen in the studio. And I'll be having much later on the program Ongama Mthinka, lecturer at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. So yes, let's begin with the show with you now, Comrade Gbenga, and as well as Amechi. Let's look at this issue of the lingering labour concerns in Africa, which usually is a back and forth thing here. So one would wonder, why is it that there isn't any solution between workers and government when it comes to workers' welfare and, of course, pay packages? Let me start with you now, Amechi.
I think for me, I see it as a normal philosophy in life that the choice and the intention of a worker is actually different from the objective of employers. So eventually, every employer wants to exploit a worker for gain.
But should that be so?
It's natural because he who wants profit wants it at all costs. And the worker who wants to work as well needs to be paid. So compensation is not for free. So this struggle of give and take cannot be avoided in the workplace. Between an employer and employee, there is always an issue. There is no level of relationship that could hide such feeling. It's just normal that in a workplace, there is a giver, there is a taker.
But if you have such in a workplace where a giver and a taker find it hard to come at a common ground, where you say, okay, for this particular job you do here, this is what you get. And if you don't do this, this is what you get. So why is it always difficult for an agreement to be reached? Because it's about the two parties having to, well, enjoy some benefits, so to speak.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the objective that differs, the essence of trade unionism, we should understand, is to protect members from such exploitation. And we are now looking at it that agreement may be reached. In most cases, like in Nigeria, you reach an agreement, implementation becomes a challenge. So you find it difficult to believe the genuinity of such agreement in the first place. But I want to believe that the essence of trade union is a case of the happenings around the world. Between an employer and employee, if you remove trade union, eventually it will look like a discretionary act where employer come and do what he desire and what he feel like. But I am very sure that the essence of trade union and the essence of employer, the real cause, the issue that are raising between these two parties is common. And research has proven that you cannot rule it out. In a workplace, there must be an issue that eventually will justify the existence of these two parties. All right, now,
Komalafe, you represent the informal sector.
Right.
Give us a bit of a heads up of what it is like for those who are not earning salaries and are able to, maintain themselves, but, they still want to be recognized as normal workers that are deserving of, pay increase, so to speak.
Well, for the informal sector, there's no question of pay increase as such, because these are mainly own account workers. They own their account. They own their small businesses. But there are critical issues around space, especially in major cities like Lagos, where government has its own ideas of development, which over time we have discovered to be very anti-people, because it tends to displace working people from existing work spaces without any conscious attempt to provide alternatives. So we've had, and that's also linked to the larger issues and policy choices of government, especially such policies as privatization. In the former sectors, we've had a situation where over 600 state-owned enterprises have been privatized since 1986, when the President IBB military dictatorship started the structural adjustment program. And out of these 600, according to the Bureau of Public Enterprises, less than 10% are actually functioning today. So you've had millions of workers losing jobs. You've had wage cuts. You've had what we call degradation of labor, a situation where massive numbers of workers, are made to function as casuals without defined times of employment, and so on and so forth. We also had such policy mix as
so policies in not one way or the other contributes to the way
enormously. So the way.
Okay, let's hold your thought now. Let's quickly bring in Unthinker. I'm told he's online. Unthinker, if you can hear me now, let's look at the labor struggle around the continent now, which is often synonymous with wage increments and wage review. How do you think wage increase now would improve workers' condition?
Yeah, thank you, Esther. Good evening to your guests in studio. So indeed, inequality of income is very huge in the continent, where you find that 10% of the population owns over 40, close to 50% of the total GDP of the continent. So what you then find is that labor has got to struggle for increases that at least try to close that gap. Because, I mean, if you look at per capita income in the continent at just over 5%, you get the sense that it is equitably shared. But when you look deeper into different countries, that rate of inequality is actually way too high.
All right, let me quickly hold your first thought for now. We need to go on this quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at the lingering labor concerns in Africa in the wake of this year's International Workers' Day celebration. Welcome back. It was a hurrah of some sort in Kenya when President Kenyatta recently announced an 18% wage increase, while labor unions in South Africa have decried Cyril Ramaphosa's minimum wage of less than $2 per hour. In Nigeria, members of the organized labor have proposed a monthly minimum of $183, even though some state workers are grappling under the weight of a backlog of unpaid salaries. So now, Amechi, yes, workers are deserving of, review of their pay and better work conditions and all of that. But does it really guarantee that they will have better life? There wouldn't be any of this back and forth movement, because this is not the first time we've had workers agitating for an increase in salaries. We've had one in 2005 or thereabout, and then in 2011, and so it goes on and on. Then recently we had this 18,000 naira minimum wage in Nigeria, of course, and they were now agitating for 52,000 naira and up to 90,000 naira. And so the same issues are: workers don't have enough money to take care of their basic needs, they don't have money for feeding, they don't have money for bills to pay generally. So now you're talking about workers deserve more. How does this answer to the problems that they keep on getting by the day?
Yeah, when you have a country like ours, where the Nigerians depend on themselves for facility they should have gotten free from government. Therefore, when a worker is meant to provide electricity for himself, a worker also, like radically now, Nigerians don't go to public hospitals, especially the working class. They need attention. It's such that to tell you that government had failed in medication. And then we also talk about amenities like roads. You talk about schools. Everybody wants their children to go to private schools in Nigeria. You can't be proud of government school anymore. So when we talk about review, we're talking about overtime changes in Nigeria. The cost of living keeps going high. The dollar exchange, like that is the common indices to actually rate our economy. You agree with me that what we had in 2011 was about a bit above 100 naira. And today we're talking about 360. So that is to tell you that in the same margin, we anticipate that such minimum wage should represent such that a decent living wage should be able to take a worker home. When you say you are working, it shouldn't be classified as underemployed. Because somebody can be in employment, eventually, there's no difference with others on the street.
So, well, in the case where, like you rightly mentioned, that there's a facility, the standard of living is too high for most workers, isn't it better that the government provides these amenities so that if at all there's an increment, so to speak, it wouldn't be to the detriment of the economy, because we're talking about inflation here. So the government can provide these things and, check on the level of increment, so to speak, on the workers' salaries, don't you think? I agree with you. But the question is, until such provisions are made, then we can also negotiate the other way around. Now we're talking about monetize everything for me, since I'm responsible for all. A situation whereby government remember their responsibility, housing for workers, whereby a worker knows that I am already given a place to stay. Education is free, and if not for anything, moderate for me to pay. Certainly, don't forget that when we talk about review of salary, it's not going to be a thing that will continue all the way. Right. A time come, increase become very minimal. But at that time, let it be that other provisions have already been made for a worker. Right. Because the essence of receiving is to spend. Yes, indeed. So now, Komolafe, if you're looking at the challenges that the labor struggle usually experiences, what would that be? Tell us what you think are some of the challenges being faced in the labor union.
Yeah, the basic challenge always is to ensure that workers get a fairer deal. The employer wants to maximize profits. The worker also wants to ensure that he has wages that is basically enough to meet up with the basic needs of himself and members of his or her family. So like Comrade Amechi said, you are not working just for the sake of working. You are working so that you'll be able to provide for your basic needs and that of your dependents. So the challenge always is to balance this equation between the workers' desire for social justice in the workplace and the employers' desire for maximized profits.
Right.
And then, like I tried to highlight earlier, government policies most often tend to favor the employer to the detriment of workers. Take, for instance, this time last year, the exchange rate was about 150 naira.
So what is the labor union doing with that regard to help address this
that's
issue?
exactly what I'm talking about. 150 naira to $1, now it's about 360. That's over 100% increase in less than 12 months. The implication of that for the wage earner is that what is actually taking home has been halved.
Right.
So the union has a responsibility to also ensure that if that has happened, at least there should be, if not exactly commensurate, increase to be able to cope with the effects of that, government policy.
Okay.
At least some reasonable increase.
All right, Mtemka, let's talk about the, labor unionism in South Africa now. Give us a heads up of how you think the struggle, can be contained rather, to, pursue the needs of workers in South Africa.
So I think I want to agree first with the speaker that talked about how the failure to deliver public services affects worker income, because there's not only are workers competing to ensure that they get a fairer share of the revenues they generate, but the expenditures that they have to make in the private sector with private healthcare as well as private education, compete for that income, as well as transport also. I mean, what we find in South Africa is that workers tend to live very far from places of work, and a huge amount of money goes to transport. What is happening in South Africa is that most labor unions are represented with federations and sit at a national organization, at a national bargaining platform where employers, the government, as well as big business are represented. But the challenge is that within a global capitalist system that's more neoliberal, the share that workers will continue to receive is by default going to be lower. But also there's a need to expand the economy and address the challenge of underemployment, where you find that people are employed for less than they are qualified for. And there's a need for greater investment in the manufacturing sector as well as primary industries in the continent, not just services which require high-end skilled labor, but there does need to be a significant diversification of players within the trade union movement. And we are seeing in South Africa that each time there's a new labor union, the demands that are placed when negotiations are taking place, which favor workers, become more, because there's then competition among the unions as to which one best represents worker interests.
Yes, talking about workers' interests now, give us a picture of what is best for the South African worker. Would you say the government has done enough to provide for these workers, knowing that they have, they don't have what they need to survive, so to speak?
Absolutely not. There's a huge disjuncture between what the income of top executives with the general workers in South Africa. And I think while South Africa has tried to stay clear of regulations and I mean, we have the minimum wage debate only now, and the 20 rand an hour that has been agreed on. There's a common understanding that it is actually not where we should be. It's not a living wage, but it's a starting point, and it will address about 6 million workers that are there. It's not enough. A lot more needs to be done to ensure that those who are employed at least, get a sustainable wage. But also there's a huge number of people who remain outside of employment. The informal sector employs a lot of people, but the kinds of incomes that people generate from that are erratic and they are very low. So there's a huge crisis of youth unemployment, for example. So while government needs to think about ways to ensure that those who are employed are have got decent work and are earning good salaries, also there's a need to actually open up the employment market for new entrants.
All right, thank you very much, Mthinka, for your contributions on Africa Today.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Gbenga and Amaechi, let's quickly wrap up the show now. What's the way forward in achieving a united front? Because we, Labour for some time have been experiencing two factions. Talking about the Trade Union Congress and of course the Nigerian Labour Congress, where you have two leaders, manning a ship, and you're talking about trying to put forward the demands of workers. Now, when you have two factions in the ship, how do you think the workers' interests will be represented before the government or before those that are, who have the responsibility of providing the necessary tools for workers to be productive?
I think in the real sense, government ought not to play politics into the unity of workers. But we saw in 2005 when Obasanjo came with the law of establishing TUC, the essence was to probably depreciate some of the values and see how they can strengthen Nigerian Labour Congress. But I think that has not succeeded because Labour will always have a common objective. The essence of trade unionism is for protection. So if you have 10 centers in Nigeria, for instance, right, essentially when there is a national issue, there will be need for joint discussion, joint decision on the best way to confront such issue that workers are protected. And that is why you become unpopular, and it will be unpopular of any trade union or a center to eventually buy the option of probably speaking for government for any reason. Eventually you lost that battle because members already know that the common objective we have is something that the umbrella will show. So for me, in as much others see the disadvantage, we continue to see the advantage of our unity, and we ensure we remain united.
Now, Gbenga, do you share the same thoughts as Amaechi?
Yeah, absolutely. Unity is strength. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, there are sometimes irreconcilable differences, and people may have to part ways. But like he said, if the motivating objective of the union movement is protecting workers' interests, they will always have reasons to align, especially when there are concrete challenges that affect the workers' welfare, workers' earnings, and the situation in the workplace, or the general macroeconomy, pose threats to working people. So they will always have to align. All
right. And on that note, I'd like to thank you very much, my guests in the studio, Gbenga Komolafe, as well as Amaechi Asunwani, National Vice President, Nigeria Labour Congress. Thank you for your thoughts on the show. Well, at a time when unemployment rate is said to be a ticking time bomb in Africa, most of those employed find themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place where working conditions are unsafe and take-home pay is unsustainable. To an extent, angry rhetorics may not put the economy on a path that works for the deprived and disadvantaged, as the answers are largely dependent on a policy upgrade inspired by a paradigm shift and the political will. And that is our package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Omokwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better. Thank you, sir.